Hey, welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to another episode of Critiquing Creationism. Here we're going to examine young Earth creationist claims through the lens of both science and faith. I'm Dr. Joel Duff, a professor of biology and a Christian who believes that seeking truth requires careful examination of the evidence that God has left us in both Scripture and in creation. In this series, we respectfully analyze young Earth creationist writings and media, not to mock or tear down. Although this is YouTube, we're going to have a little bit of fun, but in doing so, my goal is to help identify where scientific evidence and biblical interpretation may have gone awry. My goal is to help viewers better understand scientific concepts and ideas. We can learn a lot, actually, by looking at creationist concepts and trying to understand maybe where they've gone awry. And we're going to point out areas where well-meaning creationists have misunderstood or misrepresented the data. So whether you're a committed young Earth creationist, and I hope there are some watching, someone who maybe questions those views, maybe you're just curious about creationism, or maybe you're just looking to learn more about a topic or understand misconceptions like dire wolves. I mean, we're just going to learn some cool stuffs about dire wolves today. So in today's episode, we're gonna think about this picture right here. And I've got some other supporting data, but this picture really spoke to me. I've seen it shared on social media many times. What you're looking at here is a display at the Brea Tar Pits museum, right? The Brea Tar Pits is a paleontological research site located right in urban Los Angeles. Now, the Brea Tar Pits, it's one of the most famous fossil sites in the world. These are natural asphalt seeps that have preserved extensive and diverse arrays of fossils. More than 3 million fossils have been pulled from this location. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of dire wolves. This is over 400 skulls of dire wolves and more than 4,000 individual dire wolves have been found at this particular location. So when these tar pits are formed by crude oil that seeps up to the surface through fissures in the Earth's crust, over time, the light elements evaporate, leaving a sticky asphalt. And then there's these asphalt pools that sometimes are covered by water during the rainy season, of which today there aren't a lot of rainy seasons, but in the past it was a little bit wetter in the LA basin. And so given the appearance of being a pool of water that's inviting to come to. And so, oh, look, I slipped, I fell in, and I'm trying to get out of the pool, but it's full of this sticky tar. And soon you're wallowing in it. And what we have are all the organisms that didn't find their way back out of the tar pit. All right, so it is a natural death trap, essentially. And these pits are thought to have been active over tens of thousands of years. And there's even still bubbling asphalt still present at several locations here today. I'm well aware of this tar. we took a trip when I was a kid. I think we were coming from Colorado where we had lived at the time. And we were visiting my grandparents in the LA basin, I think La Mesa. And we stopped at the Brea Tar Pits. My father really enjoys natural wonders and museums and things like that. So I'm really blessed by being able to see a lot of these things. I'm sure I didn't probably appreciate it when I was young as much as I do now, but I appreciate the fact that I've been to the Brea Tar Pits. Although my memory of the Brea Tar Pits is of having a lot of tar on me. We had a picnic. We never ate out. We carried our own food. We were just, you're just, making it by in life, right? And so we had sandwiches and we spread out a blanket out in the picnic area. Well, there was picnic tables, but we had a blanket on the grass, and it didn't take us very long to realize that there was also tar, little patches of tar in the grass. And just the sticky, gooey stuff. And I had sat on some, and so I had it on my swim trunks because I think we were probably going to like the Santa Monica Beach afterwards. And so, yeah, it was a messy, sticky mess. And I remember it to this day, even though I was, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old at most at the time. But anyway, the Brea Tar Pits. They really hold an extraordinary record of life during the late Pleistocene epoch, which is 50,000 years to 10,000 years ago is sort of the main range in which organisms were finding themselves trapped in the sticky tar in these pools, unable to get out, and therefore preserved for us, giving us a wonderful record of climate change and types of organisms, and actually the changes in organisms over this particular time. Lots of ice age fauna. In fact, probably the best representation of the most recent ice age that there is out there. As I said before, several million specimens have been extracted from the Brea Tar Pits, and there's still many more that could be found. And there's certainly portions of the city that cover areas that contain, I'm sure, many tens of millions of fossils still. That ice age fauna includes things like saber-toothed cats, huge ground sloths, like ground sloths taller than me. Lots of several different canines, and then a bunch of herbivores as well. But a really high prevalence of carnivores. It seems that carnivores gathered here, noticing that some other animals had gotten stuck in there, and then of course in their attempt to actually, retrieve them, not to save them, all right, but to eat them. All right, they found themselves stuck in these various pits. But the Brea tarts are especially notable for their vast collection of dire wolves. Over 4,000 specimens of dire wolves, at least pieces of individual dire wolves, have been discovered in the Brea Tar Pits. Here you see over 500 skulls themselves. And the reason this caught my eye, right? The reason I noticed this the reason this particular image always sticks out to me is because of the creationist angle, which we'll get to, of course. Why don't I just give you the two big takeaways right now? And then if you want, you can stick around and learn a lot more about dire wolves. My two big takeaways are this. One is, look at this picture. 400 skulls. Now, you don't see a close-up of these skulls. If you looked, you could probably see from your perspective that there is some slight variation in those skulls, slightly different sizes, maybe some different shapes of some of the bones. Certainly some of them have teeth and other ones don't have teeth, but that's not a significant difference between them. But nonetheless, what you have 400 dire wolves represented here, and there's over 4,000 total individual dire wolves represented. So that allows us to look at the variation in a species from long ago. But not just a snapshot at one moment in time, a snapshot, many snapshots through tens of thousands of years. And over those tens of thousands of years that dire wolves had been visiting this particular location, and every once in a while, one or two get trapped in the tar pit and get preserved for us, we see that species changing over 4,000 years. Except really, they don't change a whole lot. That's what's really impressive. That's what's really amazing. And that's going to be one of my main points about creationism, because we're going to be talking about post-flood speciation, hyper-speciation, this idea that young earth creationists need to have just two canines get off the ark. And then as they disperse away from the ark, because they're a kind of canine, and as they disperse away from the ark, they somehow have to become over 100 different species of canines just in the last 4,000 years. And here we have an example of an extinct canine, this dire wolf. And this extinct canine is represented by thousands of individuals just at this particular location. But I'll take you to another map that will show you all the other locations that dire wolves have been found. So they are found widely across all of North America. And what has been found are very similar to each other, easily recognizable as this particular species. So although young earth creationists sort of need to have organisms changing extremely rapidly from just one type of canine into hundreds of different ones, gray foxes, red foxes, African wild dogs, wolves, coyotes, and all those domesticated dogs, right? All of those coming from just two individuals that got off the ark 4,500 years ago. That's the model for post-flood diversification. So this particular picture just screams to me that this is a species that has lived over, well, in the case of the conventional dating, tens of thousands of years. And actually phylogenetic analysis and others suggest that this particular species probably existed for several 100,000 years, if not 500,000 years or more. But let's just say tens of thousands of years. And over those tens of thousands of years didn't change very much morphologically. And so that is interesting in itself, but I'll talk more about that a little bit later. The second thing that's interesting about this is that dire wolves aren't the only type of canine that was found at the Brea Tar Pits. There are lots of coyotes as well. Now, we don't have any dire wolves today, right? But we still have coyotes. And the coyotes that are found in the Brea Tar Pits are actually very similar to the coyotes that are found today. They're named the same species as they are today. So 10,000 years ago is probably, sort of the last ones that are being trapped at this particular location. But we still have the same species and we can recognize them. So that same trend of species don't change very much, all right? And there's lots of individuals across a wide geographical region that maintain a consistent morphology that allows us to identify them as being that species. We need to talk about how in the world would that fit into a young Earth creationist model of extraordinarily rapid change. The other critical factor here, or another critical factor here, is all of these are from the Ice Age or before the last Ice Age. Now, of course, in conventional understanding of the Earth's history and this particular region, as there's been multiple ice ages in North America, young Earth creationists, they rely completely on a single ice age that occurred shortly after the flood. Oh, by the way, in case this sounds familiar, like you watched one of my latest videos, yes, this is a follow-up to this particular video, a creation question I received through Facebook. Where did all the cat species come from? We're going to talk about dog species today, or canine species. In the I'm really focusing in on dire wolves, but I'll kind of mention the other types of canines as well. But this question I was asked earlier were, hey, there was just, Ken Ham says there was just one, a pair of cats on the ark, and they got off and they turned into lions and pumas and cheetahs and tigers and saber-tooth tigers and all those other extinct types of cats. And my main point of this particular mailbox episode, I call it at the time, was that, hey, all those cats would have had to have diversified and become unique species living in diverse regions across the entire globe within just a few hundred years. And why do I say that? Because, as I was saying before, Answers in Genesis says, and other creationists say, there was a single ice age. That single ice age occurred shortly after the global flood. And so they would say the global flood occurred at 2,350 BC. So that's 4,350 years ago. So Noah's getting off the ark right here. And what they would, suggest is that as they leave the ark, right, there's a couple generations that go by and you get to 2250, 100 years. And that's where you have Babel, where all the people came together in the land to build the city of Babel and the Tower of Babel. And then they disperse. So people have to leave from there at that time. But, presumably animals are moving away from the ark in the Middle East and going out to the nether parts of the world over those first 100 years as well. But it would say the first woolly mammoths showed up. They have to say the woolly mammoths weren't on the ark because there was just a general type of elephant on the ark that became woolly mammoths and mastodons and African elephants and Asian elephants and so forth. Well, that's because some elephants moved up north, and when they encountered the beginnings of all this snow that was happening 150 years after the flood, then they developed, I guess they would say the genetic variation they have was selected for hair, and therefore they became woolly. And they did this in the period of just, a generation or two. Because, elephants take a while to make new copies of themselves, right? To reproduce. And so they must have had offspring that immediately had more and more hair just in a couple generations to form woolly mammoths. And so then they're in the Ice Age begins here just 100 years after the flood. And so here you have Ice Age up here. All right. All the way to about 2000 BC. And at that point, the Ice Age is starting to, you see the glacial maximum. It's only like 2150. So that's only what, 250 to 300 years after the flood. So within just 300 years, nearly a mile thick of ice, forms over most of the northern hemisphere. And all of that has to build up. And that then has to all melt. And when it does, it comes to a close. And within 100 years, all the ice is melted back to something approximating what we see it today. Right. Well, now this provides a very strict timeline for where the Ice Age animals lived. Right. Dire wolves we don't have any evidence of them existing after the Ice Age. They've existed. They lived all over North America, but wherever we find their remains, they're in sediments that date from the Ice Age and before the last Ice Age, or through the last hundreds of thousands of years. And so that means all dire wolves had to have come into existence and then lived their lives, right? And been trapped and preserved in many, many different locations, including 4,000. And remember, they've only extracted stuff and examined stuff from a very small portion. Right? If we said it's a 10th, but it's probably more like 100th. But let's just say they've looked at a 10th of the main remains. All right, they've been able to find those and extract them. That would mean there's 40,000 dire wolves preserved in the Brea Tar Pits. But I can't imagine it might be a lot more than that. Okay, so you have 40,000 dire wolves, and they all have to have lived and gotten trapped in the Brea Tar Pits prior to the end of the Ice Age. Because there aren't any more after the end of the Ice Age. There's no evidence of dire wolves existing. They've gone extinct. They're a very distinct species. So just reproduction alone, much less why they're only in North America. So 2 dogs got off the ark, they had to travel, and as they did, somehow they changed into, some of the offspring changed into dire wolves, which crossed over the Bering Strait, came into North America, and then those original animals then reproduced many, 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 many times, right? It's going to take quite a few generations to create 40,000 dire wolves to be able to trap, and they all have to have lived around the Brea Tar Pits, and surely they didn't all fall into the tar pits, right? We really think that, falling into a tar pit and getting trapped in there is a pretty rare event. Most people who study this stuff think of it as more like, just a couple per year. They look at other ones that are like, they're not dumb animals, and they're like, I'm not getting in there. I saw my neighbors, I saw my friends, it's like, that wasn't good. And then they have more offspring, right? Then they're traveling, and wolves are very much, they move around a lot, right? So they're at the Brea Tar Pits, they move off, maybe they come back in 4 or 5 years. There's a whole bunch of new dire wolves, right? With less experience, and a couple of them get stuck and die and get trapped there, right? So this isn't like there's packs and packs and packs and packs of them, and they're all just jumping in after each other. And so hundreds of them at a time are getting stuck in the Brea Tar Pits. Right? You would imagine it'd be a very rare event. Just like there's a place in Wyoming that I've been up to as well. There's a natural trap there. It's a cave, and the cave only has an entrance from the very top, and it's on a rocky mountainscape in sandstone. And there's just this small hole, right, which opens up into a huge cave underneath. There's no escape from it. And so animals that are maybe running, especially like prey animals, and they're running away from something, and they accidentally fall into this hole. Well, they fall down into the pit, right? And then that's it, right? They die down there, and their bones accumulate. And there's hundreds of thousands of bones down there. But it's a little tiny hole, and in a place that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's only going to be an animal once in a while that wanders by, and most of them aren't going to fall in, right? It's going to be a pretty rare event that they fall in. And so when you have hundreds of thousands of individuals represented in that place, I might be overreaching on there. Let's say 50,000 individuals. I'm confident of that. That represents a whole long time. And guess what? They're all mostly Ice Age stuff, right? There's a few modern things. At the very top of the pile, there's a giant pile of bones, right? And at the very top of the pile is some modern stuff, but underneath is all this Ice Age stuff. That represents a long period of time and represents the change of organisms over time. That's what makes it a really interesting site. Okay, back to our young Earth creationist model, in which they then, the point here is that by the time you get to 400 or 500 years, at max maybe 600 years after the flood, the ice age is over, everything's melting off, people are moving and entering all these different places. And lots of animals are going extinct, right? We know from the fossil record that there's huge numbers of mammals that we don't have today that were around not that long ago during the Ice Age and just before the last Ice Age. So Answers in Genesis and Young Earth Creationists, they have to propose that lots of speciation occurred and that dozens and dozens of types of elephants, dozens of types of cats, felines, dozens of types of canines, many types of rhinoceri, all right? All the hippopotami species, all of them had to have evolved from just two individuals into distinct species, which then were consistent over some period of time in their morphology, right? Their features. And they couldn't have done a lot of breeding with each other, right? They couldn't have crossed species. Otherwise, we'd see mixtures of characteristics. A dire wolf is very different. As much as it sounds like a regular wolf, a dire wolf has been shown through molecular biology to be very different than your regular wolves. In fact, dire wolves are as different as a fox is, right, from wolves. And so if they had hybridized, even though they lived together, I mean, there was clearly coyotes. There's hundreds of coyotes preserved in the same exact location. They must have seen each other, and yet they didn't interbreed with each other because we see no morphological hybrids between them. And we've done molecular analysis at other locations shown that the molecular biology shows that they did not hybridize with one another. All right, either they were completely incapable or they just never did. And so young Earth creationists can't appeal to hybridization, creating new species and new variations when we can't find evidence of that. Okay. All right. I got myself off track. Got a little ahead of myself with the story, but we'll just see where this goes. I don't really have a script for critiquing creationism. This is a drawing of like an image of what the Brea Tar Pits would have been like. Oozing tar, pits in the ground, right? And this shows you a few of the representative animals, right? The pits tell you, the fossils in the pits tell you this is what was here at a certain time. Now, they have very carefully extracted this dried up tar because there are some of the pits that are basically completely dried out, right? And then they go through and they go layer by layer by layer by layer by layer, right? These things have been stacking up over time. And so you can watch the fauna change over time in terms of replacing itself with other different fauna that comes and lives in this particular area. You can look at the pollen, you can look at other types of things to tell what kind of plants live in the area. And you can tell this area has changed over time, which you would make sense, during the Ice Age, different climate in the LA basin than there is today. So you have elephants, you have mastodons and mammoths preserved in the tar pits. You have these giant sloths, which most sloths are from South America. There was one type of sloth from South America that seems to have traveled north because we find the last of its fossils here in North America. And then it goes extinct as well. There are giant sloths in like the Grand Canyon. So they're pretty wide. Actually, I think there were giant sloths all the way over in Florida. I mean, that's a whole nother critiquing creationism episode. Like, how does these giant sloths get spread out all over southern North America and then down into South America? And they're all quite similar to one another. And yet they have long lifespans, but they're all extinct today. How did they evolve from a small sloth that was on the ark? There you have your saber-toothed cat as well. Multiple different species of felines. Multiple different species of canines. I mean, I mentioned you've got coyotes. I believe there's also a few actual wolves there, gray wolf or something similar to gray wolf, and then you have your dire wolf. All right, so here we have again an image of so many of the same species over and over and over and over and over again, ending up in this particular. We know that you couldn't have had 4,000 dire wolves alive at one point in time just in this one area, right? There's not enough prey for that, especially since there are other carnivores in the area. You got to share the prey a little bit, right? So that suggests that this isn't just like a whole group of these came and just jumped into the tar pit. This is something that's gradually accumulating over time. And young Earth creationists, they don't have a lot of time to be able to explain the origin of all of these different individuals. So let me take you to this paper. Dire wolves were the last of an ancient New World canine lineage. Now, New World means North America and South America, but it turns out dire wolves were only in North America, it seems. And so for a long time, dire wolves were just included as like another species of Canis. Canis is the genus that you have. Canis lupus, that's your gray wolf, right? And then you have your coyotes, right? And then you have your domesticated dogs, right? And then there's other Canis species. There's been 15 or 20 other Canis species, which were alive at different times. And dire wolves are just thought to be one of those because they do have a lot of similarities to wolves. So as it says, they were considered to be one of the most common widespread large carnivores of the Pleistocene America, yet we don't know a whole lot about their evolution or extinction, at least at the time of writing this paper. So they took a look at genome. They actually got, ancient DNA from some bones, from some subfossil remains, because they're only 13,000 years to 50,000 years old. They're not completely permineralized or turned into rock, right? So there's still some DNA in some of these, especially in some cold caves where they've been found. And they found that even though the animals kind of superficially look similar to gray wolves, they're really a highly divergent lineage that split off from living canids. They estimate 5.7 million years ago. In other words, the number of different mutations and variations in their genes suggests that they didn't share a common ancestor for 5.7 million years. That's how long it would take to accumulate that many mutations. To give you some perspective on that, that's about the amount of genetic change in their genome, differences in their genomes between like a chimpanzee and a human. Right, that's the amount of differences that there are between dire wolves and canids. That's a whole other question as to why young Earth creationists are okay with this amount of genetic diversity, and that's not even as diverse as the gray wolves. The gray foxes. They're way more different. Even a red fox is more different than both of those. And then you've got a bunch of extinct canines, which we know are even more different. Right, so there's a tremendous amount of diversity. It's thought that they're up to 20, 25 million years old. So what they found out was, in contrast to numerous examples of hybridization across the canidae, which is like in the genus Canis, between wolves and coyotes, they can hybridize. We know of hybrids of those. I've actually worked on and sequenced DNA from animals in this area of Ohio, and seen that they are a combination of a wolf and a coyote from some time past. But they could not find any evidence of hybridization between dire wolves and the rest. Again, probably owing to the fact that they have such a large amount of genetic difference. I believe they have a different chromosome number as well, which could have made them incompatible. So where are dire wolves from? This indicates a bunch of locations where dire wolves were sampled. So we have lots of fossil sites that have dire wolves. So you see all the way down. Oh, actually, there are a couple down here in South America. But most of it's in North America. And you can see your gray wolf is generally a little more northern, but they do overlap in their habitats. And this certainly overlaps with coyotes, because we have coyotes all the way from western to eastern U.S. and down through Mexico. And at the same time, we have Ethiopian wolves and jackals and African wild dogs, and the African wolf and the black jackal and the D-hole. All right, those are other canines that are alive today and have their different, areas of the world. And this is the phylogeny they come up with. Phylogeny is just a representation of how these organisms are related to one another via their molecular data. So like their genome, how similar is their genome? And if you just want to think of it as like that, as like the two that are closest together, coyotes and gray wolves, are the two most, they are the least different in their DNA. And they also are the least different in terms of like the morphology of them and their behavior and so forth. I think most people recognize that coyotes and wolves are not terribly different from one another, but they don't hybridize very much, but they're truly good species. And then, of course, all your domesticated dogs are just a sub-variety of gray wolves. But you have the African wolf, Ethiopian wolf, African wild dog, your jackals, all right, which are more distinct from your gray wolves. And then you have this thing, the dire wolf. Right. And then you have your foxes. Your foxes are like a different group of the canines. And just to put a point on it here, Answers in Genesis, Ken Ham and many other creationists say that all of these different canines, all are descendants of two. They all share a common ancestor. They all have evolved, right, from just two individuals, just 4,500 years ago. But you have to add on to this, there are like 100 other extinct ones that all are in recent sediments, the top part of the geological column. And so they also must be descendants of those two canines that got off the ark. So a tremendous amount of evolution has happened. That's why we call it hyperevolution or super rapid evolution. Speciation has gone on, and it must have happened super fast because it all happened before the Ice Age, within just 100, 200 years. And then you have gray foxes, which we have a long record of that suggests they've been like a gray fox for hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, so I have one other thing that I'm going to show you, and that is we're going to go to the paleo database, and I'm just going to show you the fossil record of canines in general. And just like we did for cats, all right, we did for felines, and we looked at the diversity of felines through time, in order to just hammer home, the difficulty level for young Earth creationists, the challenge that they are faced with in terms of explaining the origins of all these organisms and how they ended up fossilized. Because you got to remember, what is the fossil record? The fossil record is, maybe the irony here is that if you just listen generically to young Earth creationists like Ken Ham give a talk, he's going to talk about like, how do we get hundreds of thousands of fossils and billions of fossils? Well, there's only one way to have preserved everything like that. There must have been a massive flood, a massive global catastrophe, which just instantaneously saved them. But the thing is, every one of these dire wolf samples is not the result of a global flood. It's not the result of a catastrophe, really. I mean, it's kind of a catastrophe for them to fall into a tar pit. But you can see that that's not the type of preservation that normally young Earth creationists talk about. They talk about, these amazing samples. Well, how did they get preserved? By a flood. But this is not a flood. And all these other ones here, most of these are found either in cave deposits or cracks or someplace they've fallen down into, or maybe there's been a debris slide. But a local disaster, right? A local phenomena that has occurred that has preserved them. And how many get preserved to today? Like how many coyotes walking around right now on the face of North America are we going to have preserved for us 1,000 years from now or 2,000 years from now? How many of the ones that are alive at this very moment? If there's 100,000 coyotes alive right now, how many of those will end up in the fossil record? 2 or 3, 4 or 5? I think that would be pretty good. You have to fall just in the right spot or get preserved just in the right place in order for your bones to manage to survive to the point where they're going to get fossilized. Falling in a tar pit is one really good way for that to happen, but there's not tar pits everywhere. And so the vast majority of individuals that have lived, and we could say the vast majority of individuals that were born and lived after getting off of Noah's Ark, would not make it into the fossil record. So if we have 4,000 dire wolves just from the Brea Tar Pits, and we have several hundred, probably more than 1,000 individuals from other locations, And each one of them represents just 1/100th or 1/1000th or maybe 1/10,000th of the number of individuals that actually lived in that area, and they just happened to be the lucky one that got preserved. That means there was millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of dire wolves that have lived over time. That's a population problem in terms of just population growth and feeding all those if they were all basically alive within the space of just a couple hundred years. The place was overrun with them. And then how would they surviving at the same time that coyotes were everywhere, and there were wolves, and there were like 3 other different species of canines like that? Why would there be multiple species of the same kind of organism? Right? Answers genetics try to say, well, they adapted to different locations, but they're living in the same location. So why are they so distinct from each other? How do they maintain that distinction? They need a population genetic model in order to explain how you'd end up with 3 or 4 different species of the same kind of organism, basically sharing a similar environment. Yes, they might be specialized on different food types, so that might be part of your explanation. But they never hybridize? They don't interrelate with each other? How do they maintain their distinctives? Those are all questions that Answers in Genesis and Young Earth Creationists need to develop answers for, not just hand wavy like, hey, dog got off the ark and, it had 2 alleles, one for shaggy coat and one for short coat. And the ones with shaggy coat alleles went to, to live up north, and the short-haired ones decided, it was really nice right here in this hot region, and that's how we ended up with 2 different kinds of canines. But you got 100 different kinds of canines, and they have tens of thousands of different traits. That's a far more complex model than the simplistic model that's presented. All right, I said I would go to the paleo database. Let's do it. Okay, we're going to type in the genus name because it's been placed in a different genus now, not in Canis. Still in the Canidae, the family of canines, but in a different genus. There's like 15 different genera of canines. And here's Ancyandyrus. There's a couple other species that are very similar. We could do the whole genus. Now, if I click on the whole genus, you'll see that stuff disappears. I mean, that was all fossils in the world, right? We've narrowed it down to one genus now. And that genus, there are no dots here in Australia, Asia, Europe, or Africa. We have to go over here to a few spots in South America, and then we have lots of different places in North America in which this particular genus has been found. And I'll bet that if we go down and look at LA, here we are, LA Basin. Well, there we go, right there. That's got to be it. Yep, we've got dire wolf right here. Oh, at Rancho La Brea, the La Brea Tar Pits. All right, and there's a reference for it. So you could, this is free for anybody to access, right? You just go to the site, the navigator, type in whatever organism you want to look at, and it'll show you like, here's a bunch of places where fossils have been found, annotated from those. And so we've got all these other sites. Now, let's look at the color. You notice that they're kind of yellows. This is your geological timetable down here. And we have the Paleozoic running up through the Permian. So this is 500 million down here up to, 251 million years. And then the Mesozoic, Triassic, Cretaceous, that's your age of the dinosaurs. And that is your, that's your Mesozoic. And that runs up to 66 million years ago. And of course, it's this spot right here, which is thought to be the big asteroid impact. And then you have the Cenozoic. Right. For most young Earth creationists, right here is, everything below here is all like laid down by the flood. That's why all dinosaurs are like in the flood layers. Right. There's no dinosaurs from after the flood. Some young Earth creationists go beyond this, but let's just say everything above this is sort of like stuff that was laid down after the flood, after the animals got off the ark. So everything you can see here is all dogs. You know what? We're backing up here. Get time. I'm going to do it. Where am I here? Let's do Canidae. How about that? All Canis. All right. I mean, all canines. Now you see that we do have canines all over the world. All right. We have collections from everywhere. Well, notably nothing in Australia, right? There's no placental mammals in Australia until human beings brought them there. So we've got a nice collage of canids everywhere, but they're all still yellow, right? They're all yellow. Well, yellow is the Cenozoic. So that tells you one thing, very interesting thing. We have never found, there's been no documentation by anybody of a fossil of anything that represents the dog kind, right? Coyotes, wolves, foxes, dire wolves, any of those, plus Hesperonian, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of extinct groups too that are dog-like. None of them. And we could do the same thing for the Ursidae. I haven't done this. Let's hope I'm right here. There's the ursids. You know what were the ursids? Those are the bears. Bears are very similar to dogs, right? They're closely related to dogs. And so here's the bears, and they're everywhere too. Oh, except Australia. But they're only found in the Cenozoic. So again, there has never been a bear found, a fossil of a bear found in any layer that's below the Cenozoic, right? So the majority of the fossil column, geological column, nothing there. There's dinosaurs, right? There's lots of other organisms, lots of reptiles, no bears, no dogs, no cats, no horses, no, basically barely any mammals. There actually are quite a few mammals, but not really ones you'd recognize. Really weird ones. All right, let's go back to our canidae. That's our canines family. So again, Ken Ham would say this is a canine kind. God created one kind of canine, or at least two canines were preserved on Noah's Ark. And then every one of these fossil records is something that represents an animal that lived after 4,350 years and somehow dispersed from here to all these locations, died there, and was fossilized for us. And the vast majority, as I'm going to show you in a moment, have been dead for a long time. All right, they're not recently fossilized. So let's click on the Cenozoic. So I'm going to expand out to all the Cenozoic. And now we see we could break down the Cenozoic into, we got 66 million years, 23 million years, 2.58 million years, which is where the Quaternary begins. That's the age we're in now, or a period we're in now. So that's the Paleogene. So now if I click on the Paleogene, basically what I'm doing is I'm going back in time, right? I'm going back to rocks that are dated to between 66 million and 23 million. So let's click on that. And when I do, look at that. We get a bunch of dots here in North America. You might be wondering why some are yellow, but there's actually, this is sort of colored yellow. It doesn't look yellow here, but you'll see in a moment. And then there's a few in Europe and a couple here in Asia. All right, there's not a lot of records of dogs. So even at 23 million years ago, if you go down to the fossil record to the point in which you date it to 23 million years, there's not a lot of canines. And then I could go back to the Paleocene, or like the subgroup. There's nothing there. And then I can go to the Eocene. That's when I first see stuff popping up. So that would be 35, 40 million years ago, but actually I have to go up here. If I go to the oldest part of the Eocene, nothing. If I go to the Lutetian, oh, there's my first one. Very first dot shows up. And then we see a couple more dots here. And then we get up to the Oligocene. And now we're starting to see some other stuff, right? And you notice that it starts in North America and then it spreads out. It doesn't start in the Middle East and then spreads out. That's kind of what you expect. If you had, after the flood, you had layers and stuff happening, right? And animals being preserved, they should have been preserved from like the oldest ones here. The very first canines in the fossil record should have been somewhere in the Middle East, and then they spread to different places, getting there later and later and later in time. But we actually find for a number of different groups of organisms, and this is going to be the case for felines, for like camels and other things too, they actually start in the New World and they come back to the Old World at a different time, right? Your cheetahs and lions are actually from North America. All right, so now let's go up into the Neogene. Well, and that's where now we've got stuff everywhere. And let's go take a look at some of these. All right, we've got lots of different records. We want to just see what kind of canines there are in different parts here. Oh, there we go. There we go. That's this site right here. Occurrences. Here we have, and this is in one of these traps, right? It's one of these pitfall traps. Accidental deaths. We have in the Canidae, we have Canis latrans and Canis lupus. There are wolves and coyotes present. Wolves and coyotes present in this natural trap cave. And we also have Vulpes vulpes, which is, I think that's the red fox. All right. And there's also a bear there too, but not a bear that's alive today. All right. And that was from, yeah, that's from the Paleogene. So those are really old. Those are pre-last ice age types of things. And let's just go look somewhere else in Wyoming. What's here? Occurrences. Oh, Hesperocyon. All right, that's a really old canid. All right, that's a whole genus that's extinct. Multiple different species in that thing that are extinct. All right, well, let's get to the yellow ones. Let's go to the neogen. Well, let's go to the quaternary. All right, ton of things we could do here. So I'm trying to. So if I go to the quaternary, that's just from 2.58 million years to present. That's still like, before the most recent ice age. We've got lots and lots of different records. Lots of wolves, lots of coyotes, several other different types of wolves. And we can see all over Europe here and Africa. And then if we go into the quaternary, we can then go all the way in here to the Pleistocene. And eventually, I'm going to have to click on this little spot right here, and we're going to get to the Holocene, which is the last 10,000 years. And in the last 10,000 years, then these are the records of things that we think are 10,000 years or less, right? Or since the Ice Age. And now, I haven't done this, but I'm going to guess that it should just be recognizable stuff, all right? We're not going to have any of these mini extinct groups. Oh, Ash Cave. Been there. What's been found in Ash Cave? Occurrence. Well, Ursus americanus. All right, so that's a bear is found there. Let's try that again. So I guess there wasn't a dog there. Oh, maybe the dog is here in this other cave, which is nearby. This is all at Hocking Hills, just south of where I'm at. Yeah, here we've got Canis lupus. All right, that's wolf. Oh, we have Eurocyon. All right, that's an extinct one. So that's yet another thing that lived up until more recently and went extinct. So again, there were many, many, many species of canines in North America. And if they've been spread out over millions of years, I mean, you can have different species at different times. At any one time, if you were to I'm going back to 2 million years ago, there might have been 3 species or maybe 4 species of canines, right? A couple of foxes and Hesperocyon, and it's like, and so forth. And so you wouldn't have had 15 species alive at one time, all competing for the same basic habitats, right? Some of them have gone extinct, and as they've gone extinct, other ones have evolved, right? They've originated out of other or split off, there's a different variations of gray wolves today, gray wolves, in different parts of the world, just like there are red foxes in different parts of the world. We name them subspecies because there's enough variation differences that are obvious between them, but they still seem to all be the same species because they can hybridize if you brought them together. But maybe in the future, each of those subspecies will actually develop enough new differences that they'll become different species. All right, so over time you have extinction, but you have new origination. You have extinction, you have new origination. But at any one time, the principle here is the environment can really only handle so many versions of a large carnivore. Right? There's going to be a couple large carnivores that are canids. You got a couple cats. You have a bear. You've got a couple other things, right? You can't have 50 or 100. When you put it all together, well over 100 species of canines, more likely 150 to 200. And that's just the ones we know about in the broader group of canines. Those are the ones that have been identified. We're still finding new ones. So since many species might have lived, come and gone, maybe they lived in small areas and they never got preserved, or they got preserved but we're never going to find them, right? So I would say there's probably 300 or 400 different species of canines that have lived. And if 150 of those lived in North America, it would make sense that they all lived here at the same time. But in the young Earth creationist framework, they kind of have to. They kind of have to have lived here all at the same time. All right, so let's go back out to the Cenozoic. Oh, got to get rid of the ursids and the canids. Oh, I had ursids collected too. We were looking at bears as well. Not as many bears, so I didn't confuse things too much. So here's all the canids again for the whole Cenozoic. And then if I go all the way out to the whole geological column, I just want to make this point one more time. There just isn't any found below the point of that asteroid impact. And really, they don't start showing up to the late Paleogene. So, which is really after, for those young Earth creationists out there, and there are many of you out there that hold to the 66 million year break point as that being the post-flood flood boundary, in terms of like Noah walked off the flood then, and then lots of other, landslides and floods are happening afterwards. That means most of this Paleogene and Neogene stuff is all after the flood. And yet dogs don't start showing up till really late, all right, in that stuff. All this is very hard to understand within a very short time frame, very short chronology of the world. All right, I think we better call it quits. This was a lot more than I thought I would do. It's too much fun going into the paleo database, right? We can do this with every group of organisms, and you just need to play around with it because you start seeing patterns. Start looking at like, when do they show up, and then when do they diversify? And then there are some interesting groups that like they don't exist, and then there's one, and then there's more, and then there's more, and then there's more, and then they're more diverse, and there's more genera, and then they begin to peter out, all right? Like hippopotamuses or bears or elephants, right? There was no elephants back here anywhere below the Cenozoic. And then there's like one elephant, and it's a little tiny thing. And then that one elephant becomes other species of elephants that become bigger and bigger. And then you've got a lot of diversity of elephants at one time, several different genera alive at one time. And then they start to collapse. And then after the most recent ice age, of course, we lost the last of the woolly mammoths and the mastodons and so forth. And, we're down to three species that are alive today. And that might be two or one or none, in the not too distant future. And so you see patterns of diversity increasing and decreasing just by looking at the records of the fossils that are here. Yeah. So if you found this analysis helpful, to understanding something more about science, each episode we're just take a different topic, something else that young Earth creationists have said, and try to think through like what the ramifications of that thought is. And that's what I'm trying to do here, and trying to help young Earth creationists like either challenge them to come up with better answers or to really think through whether this makes any sense. Hey, come back again and we'll keep exploring creation with me, Dr. Duff, and we'll separate the facts from the fluff, right? We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.